The stars were bleeding. Not in the poetic sense, but in the way that made people scream over comms and call out for anyone still alive. One by one, the outer satellites blinked out. The black sky flickered with flashes of white-hot explosions. On board the human flagship Resolute, silence had taken over the bridge. Not peace, just the kind of silence that comes when everyone is holding their breath at the same time. No one knew exactly when the enemy had found them again. They had spent years jumping across dead systems, scraping fuel from frozen rocks and rationing oxygen in the dark. Earth was gone. The colonies had gone silent. Humanity had retreated into the edge of known space, clinging to ships held together with patches and prayer. And now the enemy was here, again. The scanners lit up, red pulses stacking like heartbeats out of rhythm. Hundreds of contacts. Thousands. Maybe more. They came like a tide, moving with impossible precision, no hesitation, no mercy. They didn't speak. Never had. Just those same black vessels with their jagged, living metal hulls and cold, silent weapons. The machines didn't miss. And they didn't stop. Captain Roan stood in the center of the bridge, his eyes locked on the main screen. It was filled with static and half-formed shapes, too many of them. His fingers twitched at his side, not out of fear but fury. He had lost everything. His crew knew it. Most of them had lost just as much. Some had lost more. They had no more planets to retreat to. No command center to call for help. This was it. The last fleet. The last humans. And the machines were coming. The air on the Resolute had a metallic edge, faint but constant, like the taste of blood. Down in the engine room, clanging metal and shouted commands bounced off the walls as engineers tried to squeeze out a few more percent from the old fusion core. On the lower decks, soldiers prepped for boarding, knowing the odds were bad. Knowing it probably wouldn't matter. But they loaded their weapons anyway. There were still children on board. Not many. Just a few born between the stars, raised in the hum of generators in the dark. They didn't remember Earth. They didn't remember sunlight or trees. Their sky had always been metal. Their lullabies, the rumble of engines and the warnings of breached hulls. But they knew what fear was. And now they could smell it in the air. Roan's second in command, a woman with lines carved into her face like old stone, leaned in. They're locking weapons. He didn't blink. Let them. She stared at him but didn't argue. She'd served with him long enough to understand the look in his eyes. There were no more retreats. No more fallback plans. The last coordinates had been spent, and the edge of the galaxy was no sanctuary. The enemy ships moved like a single creature, silent, fast, hungry. They didn't shimmer or glow. Their hulls absorbed light, absorbing everything. Every human ship had a signature. A soul, even if it was built from scrap. But the machines? They were black ghosts and they were endless. The comm crackled. They've breached the perimeter. Third defense wings gone. Roan didn't respond. He didn't need to. Everyone heard the screams before the channel went dead. He could feel the pressure in his chest, like someone tightening a grip around his ribs, but he held still. Stillness was strength now. He thought of his brother lost during the first wave on Mars. Thought of his mother's last message years ago, transmitted in static from a crumbling spaceport. Thought of every voice that had fallen silent one by one. And then he thought of the girl on Deck 7, barely old enough to speak, handing out water to wounded soldiers with hands too small for the task. He thought of her and felt something strange settle in him, not hope, exactly, but something harder. Something sharper. Open a channel to the fleet, he said. Channel open. Roan's voice was rough, tired. But when it echoed through the fleet, it hit like a drumbeat. This is Captain Roan of the Resolute. We've been running for too long. We've buried too many. They think we'll fold. They think we'll shatter. But we are not ghosts. We are not shadows. We are human. And if they want to end us, they'll have to earn it. He paused. The silence on the line was heavy. All across the fleet, heads turned toward their speakers. Engineers, gunners, doctors, cooks, everyone stopped for a second to listen. This is the last stand. And I don't care what's coming. I don't care how many of them there are. I want every gun hot. Every engine ready. We die today or we make them remember who we are. A beat passed. Then another. Then a whisper crackled through the channel. A single voice. For Earth. Then another. For Luna. For the colonies. For the lost. For us. It became a chant. Raw. Fierce. Desperate. Beautiful. The black wave of enemy ships descended, and the stars lit up again. Missiles streaked through the void. Railguns spat molten fire. Plasma turrets glowed white and gold, tracing arcs of pain through the cold vacuum. But it wasn't enough. One by one the human ships began to break. The enemy tore through their defenses like knives through paper. Fighters spiraled out of control. Flames poured from ruptured hulls. People screamed. Systems went dark. On the Resolute, lights flickered. The floor lurched. "We've lost rear thrusters," someone shouted. "Core is overheating." Roan gritted his teeth. "Reroute all power to forward shields. That'll drain life support." He looked straight at the engineer. "Do it." There was no time to argue. The deck dimmed as power drained away from the halls. The air grew colder. And still the enemy came. The Resolute fired everything it had. Torpedoes, flak rounds, EMP bursts. Even ramming drones. Some hit. Some didn't. But nothing stopped the black ships. They were fast. Smarter. Designed for one thing, to erase. A shockwave hit the side of the ship. Sparks flew. A console exploded. One of the crew fell, not moving. And then, a strange pulse. It wasn't one of theirs. It wasn't anything they recognized. It cut through space like a soundless scream. And when it passed, for a moment, the enemy ships stopped. Just for a second. But long enough. Roan stared at the screen. What the hell was that? No one answered. The scanner showed something. No, someone else. A new signal. Human. But it wasn't from their fleet. It was from deep space. Deeper than anything mapped. A signal on old military bands, decades out of use. Faint, broken, but real. Hold the line. We are not gone. Repeat, we are not gone. The bridge went still again. This time not from fear, but from something close to disbelief. "Can you trace it?" Roan asked. The comms officer shook her head. "Too far. Too faint. But it's us. It's human." Roan's heart slammed in his chest. Somewhere, somehow, someone else had survived. And they had tech powerful enough to stall the machines. Even if just for a heartbeat. The tide shifted. Not much. But just enough. A few enemy ships veered off course. Some seemed to hesitate. Just a flicker in their movement. It was the first time in years Roan had seen them react to something. "They're not invincible," he said under his breath. "They're not unstoppable. And maybe, just maybe, they were not alone after all." The signal crackled again, a little clearer now. "Humanity stands. Do not fall." The screen flashed again. A massive shape blinked into orbit near the edge of the battle. Not like their ships. Not machine either. Something different. Human design, but new. Slick. Built for war. And it had firepower they hadn't seen in years. "Who the hell are they?" someone whispered. The answer didn't come. But Roan didn't need it. His gut already knew. Somewhere out there, humanity had been building something. Waiting. Preparing. And now, they were stepping out of the dark. The enemy shifted formation, adjusting to the new arrival. But for the first time, it looked like they were calculating risk. Roan stepped forward, eyes blazing. "Get me a line to that ship." The officer blinked. "They're already calling us." "Put it through." The voice on the other end was calm. "Steady. Hold your ground, Resolute. We've come to finish what they started." And then the line went dead. Outside, the stars flared again. Only this time they weren't dying. They were fighting back. The Resolute shook again, but Roan didn't care. He gripped the console in front of him, teeth clenched, heart pounding. No one knew how long they had left. But now, there was a sliver of a chance. And that was enough. The enemy moved in, the black wave crashing forward one last time. And the Resolute, bleeding and broken, surged to meet them. Then everything went white. The flash burned like a star dying. For a moment, everything was gone. Sound, movement, even thought. Just the blinding white wash of heat and force that pushed the Resolute sideways in the void. Inside, the crew hit the floor, sparks danced through the air, and warning lights screamed red. Roan coughed as smoke filled his lungs. His ears rang, his vision blurred, but he was still upright. Somehow. The bridge had taken a hit, maybe a glancing blow. Panels were blown out. Blood pooled under a fallen crewman near the main terminal. Someone else was crying softly in the corner, holding their arm, broken and limp. But the ship was still alive. Barely. "Report," Roan rasped, his throat dry and cracked. Static. Then a shaky voice from engineering. "Main power is flickering. Backup cores online, but we're burning fast. Weapons are down to 30%. Shielding? Gone." He swallowed hard. "Life support." A long pause. Still holding. That was something. Not much, but something. He glanced around the bridge. The comms officer, Ren, was back in her seat, face pale, hair soaked with sweat. She was already working, trying to re-establish the link with the new arrival. But no reply yet. They'd gone silent after that one line. Just dropped in, fired something powerful enough to stagger the enemy fleet, and vanished into the battle. It didn't make sense. No one in the human fleet had that kind of tech. They hadn't for years. Their best ships had been destroyed in the first strikes. Earth's orbital defenses, the Martian shipyards, the Ark-class battleships. All gone. But this one, this ghost ship, had weapon systems that could knock entire formations out of sync. And its signal had come from far beyond the edge of their maps. Roan kept thinking about that voice. Calm, cold, controlled. Not panicked. Not desperate. It was human. That much he was sure of. But not from his fleet. Not from the broken survivors clinging to scraps. Something else was out there. And whatever it was, it had waited until now to show itself. The enemy didn't stop. They didn't break and run. But they hesitated. The machine ships drifted in a loose formation, reanalyzing, recomputing. They were built for extermination, not fear. But even code could recognize a threat. Their algorithms were adapting. And fast. Roan didn't care. He stared out at the battlefield, if you could even call it that anymore. It was a graveyard. Fractured ships tumbling, spilling atmosphere and bodies into space. Fires blinking like dying beacons in the void. Somewhere out there, the last defense line had already collapsed. They weren't winning. Not yet. But maybe they weren't alone anymore. Down on the lower decks, repairs were underway. Sort of. They had no spare parts, no fresh circuits. Just melted panels, broken conduits, and bruised hands. Every bolt was scavenged. Every patch was recycled from other failures. But people worked anyway. Because if they stopped moving, if they let themselves think too long, the fear would win. Tensions flared. One engineer screamed at another over a coolant leak. A medic snapped at a soldier for not helping with the wounded. Voices rose. Fists were almost thrown. But no one stopped. Not really. They couldn't afford to. In the cargo bay, families huddled in silence. Mothers held their children, hands pressed over ears to muffle the distant rumble of weapons fire. An old man sat with his back against a crate, eyes closed, whispering something under his breath. A prayer maybe. Or names. Names he didn't want to forget. They all knew what this was. The end. Or close to it. Even the children understood. They'd grown up watching ship after ship disappear. They knew what it meant when the hull creaked too long, or the light stayed red too long, or the silence between updates lasted too many minutes. This wasn't just another battle. It was the last breath of a species fighting extinction with what little it had left. In the med bay, the wounded kept arriving. Some were quiet. Some screamed. Some didn't make it past the door. The doctors didn't stop. They barely spoke. They moved like machines themselves, hands bloody, eyes numb, doing what they could with what they had. And yet, behind all that pain, something had shifted. People were talking about the ship. The new one. The one that wasn't theirs but still fought like it was. Rumors spread fast. Whispers that it was a hidden fleet, a secret weapon buried deep in the void. Some said it was the last piece of Earth's defense program, launched just before the final bombs fell. Others said it wasn't human at all, just something that remembered what humanity had done once, long ago, and decided to return the favor. No one really knew. But it didn't matter. Because hope, however fragile, had slipped in through the cracks. Roan didn't trust it. Not yet. He stood in his quarters, what was left of them, staring at a wall where a photo used to hang. It was long gone now. Burned up in a reactor fire 2 systems ago. But he still remembered it. A snapshot of a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Smiling faces. Real sunlight. Grass under bare feet. He barely remembered what grass felt like. He pulled out a thin metal object from the drawer. A data shard. Burned out. Useless now. It had once held everything he'd cared about. Recordings, memories, messages. All corrupted during the first jump. He still carried it. Not because it worked. But because it reminded him that he'd once had something worth losing. He slid it back into his pocket. The comms cracked to life. Captain. The unidentified ship, it's hailing us again. He froze. Put it through. The voice came back, same tone. Come. Measured. You're still operational. Good. Roan stepped forward. Who are you? A long pause. We are what's left. Roan narrowed his eyes. You're not part of our fleet. Where the hell did you come from? Deep space. Beyond the mapped sectors. We weren't meant to be found. Not yet. That didn't help. You saved us back there, Roan said slowly. Why? Because if we don't, you won't survive the next wave. Another pause on Roan's end. So what's your plan? Show up, fire a few shots and disappear again. You misunderstand, the voice replied. We're not here to help. We're here to end it. Roan felt his skin crawl. End what? The line crackled. For a second he thought it had gone dead again. Then the voice returned, quieter this time. The war. The extinction cycle. The machines. All of it. Roan looked around the bridge. Eyes were on him. Everyone listening. Waiting. He stared at the comm screen. If you're one of us, then you know we've been trying to do that for years. And we're losing. We know, the voice replied. That's why we didn't come back sooner. We weren't ready. And now you are? Another silence. We hope so. Then the line went dead again. Roan turned slowly toward his crew. No one spoke. Ren looked at him, eyes wide. What do you think? She asked. He didn't answer. Because he wasn't sure what he thought. There were too many unknowns. Too many questions. And now, in the middle of a dying battle, something had shifted the board. Someone had shown up with power they shouldn't have. Someone human, but different. Not part of their fleet. Not part of their plans. But carrying weapons strong enough to shake the enemy's grip. And now, they were talking about ending the war. Roan felt the weight of that word. Ending. Not surviving. Not escaping. Ending. But no one had even scratched the machines in years. Not really. Their fleets were endless. Their strategies evolved. They consumed. Adapted. Rebuilt. Every victory humans thought they'd earned was undone in days. And now someone claimed they could stop it. He wanted to believe it. But belief had cost him too much already. Hours passed. The battle never truly stopped. Not anymore. The enemy moved in cycles. Testing, probing, retreating only to regroup. The human fleet adjusted. Fewer ships now. Fewer guns. Fewer lives. They held the line anyway. What else could they do? On the Resolute, repairs continued. Messages came in from the other surviving ships. Casualty counts. Requests for medical transfers. Damage reports. Everyone was barely holding together. Roan sat at the center of it all. Listening. Watching. Waiting. The new ship hadn't fired again. Hadn't moved. Just hovered on the edge of the battle, black and silent, its hull unmarked. Like it had been built by a different set of rules. Maybe it had. Then came another signal. Not from the mystery ship. From deep space. A distant system. One they hadn't scanned in months. Another human signal. This one screaming. No one warned us, they just came out of nowhere. They're in the walls, asterisk, they're inside the station, asterisk. I don't know how they got in. Then static. Then silence. Roan gripped the edge of the console. It was spreading. The machines weren't just fighting ships now. They were bypassing defenses. Getting into places they'd never reached before. Learning faster. And there was no telling how many more human outposts were still hidden. Still waiting for help that wasn't coming. Unless... He turned back to the mystery ship. You still there? He asked into the comm. No response. He tried again. Whoever you are, if you really want to end this, now's the time. Still nothing. But then, a new signal. Different this time. An upload. Roan scanned the data. Coordinates. Military encryption. Buried archives. A location. Unmarked. Unknown. And next to it, a message. We're opening the door. But once we do, there's no going back. Roan read the message again. He looked at his crew. His ship. The wounded. The waiting. The broken. And he knew. There was no other choice. He leaned forward. Set a course. No one spoke. No one argued. They just moved. Engines ignited. Power surged. The Resolute turned, slow and battered but still breathing. Behind them, the enemy ships began to shift again. They weren't going to let them leave. But Roan didn't care. They were going anyway. And wherever those coordinates led. The silence inside the outpost felt heavier than before, like the walls themselves were waiting for something to break. Every footstep echoed too loud. Every breath seemed like a mistake. The tension between the team had grown, thick and sharp, but no one dared voice it. Not when they were being watched. Rook stayed by the comm station, eyes fixed on the screen, though nothing new had come through in hours. His hands trembled, ever so slightly, even when he kept them folded. He hadn't slept. None of them had, not really. There was no point in pretending they could rest with the sky full of drones and something unknown creeping around the perimeter each night. Outside, the wind howled like it was angry. Inside, they tried to act like everything was under control. But it wasn't. They'd been sent here to establish first contact, maybe open trade routes, maybe just observe. That was the official story. But it didn't explain the strange readings from the soil, the sudden electromagnetic pulses, or the dreams that had started weeks after arrival. Sam had stopped talking. The others tried not to bring it up. She just stared now, glassy-eyed, whispering things no one wanted to hear. Numbers. Coordinates. Sometimes names of people none of them knew. Late into the night, Hayes stood by the window, arms crossed. He watched the forest line, barely visible in the dim emergency lights. That's when he saw them again, flickers of movement. Not animals. Not drones. Shapes, upright and wrong. They didn't walk. They glided or maybe floated. Whatever they were, they didn't leave tracks. He didn't tell the others this time. The last time he did, Rook had locked himself in the storage room and started praying. Instead, Hayes just turned away and quietly locked the door. Then the next one. Then the next. Something inside him had shifted. He didn't know what they were up against, but it wasn't something Earth had trained them for. Back in the lab, Myra was still trying to decode the signal. That strange pulse that had been repeating every 6 hours since their second week. It wasn't random. She was sure of it now. The pattern was too exact. Like a language. Or a warning. The deeper she went, the more it felt like something was talking back. But not in words. In feelings. In flashes of places she hadn't seen since childhood. In voices that weren't hers but somehow knew her fears. She hadn't told the others what she'd seen in the last message. A tower buried in the ground, pulsing like a heartbeat. A shape above it stretching across the sky. And the sound. It wasn't just data. It was alive. Meanwhile, Darren worked on reinforcing the perimeter, again. Every night, something had tampered with the sensors. Not just disabled them. Rearranged them. Like it was toying with them. One morning he'd found a circle of stones near the west entrance. Perfectly laid out. 6 feet wide. Nothing inside but scorched earth. He didn't mention that either. Some things didn't need to be said out loud. The outpost wasn't just losing power, it was losing time. They'd wake up and the clocks would be wrong. Hours missing. Or repeating. Myra had tried to measure it, but her equipment kept giving her impossible results. Days were stretching. Nights were folding in on themselves. Then the scratching started. At first they thought it was an animal. Maybe wind. But it wasn't. It came from inside the walls. Like tiny claws. Scraping. Tapping. And always in threes. No matter where they moved, it followed. Like it was listening. Or waiting for something. On the 12th night, the power flickered again, but this time only in the hallway leading to the lab. That's where they found the mark. It wasn't carved. It wasn't painted. It was burned into the metal. A perfect spiral barely the size of a hand. Myra touched it even though they shouted for her not to. Her eyes went wide and she didn't speak for the next 2 hours. When she finally did, she whispered just one word, soon. The team gathered in the main room that night. No one said it, but they all knew something was coming. Something had been calling them, slowly tightening its grip. Sam was still silent, sitting in the corner, humming that low broken tune. Her fingers moved like she was typing on invisible keys. That's when the external alarms triggered. All of them. At once. Red lights flooded the room. The sound was deafening. Rook checked the monitors. The screens showed nothing. Just static. But the sound kept going, rising higher, almost shaking the walls. Then it all cut out just like that. Silence. Dark. Dead systems. Until the door unlocked itself. No one touched the controls. No one gave a command. The heavy steel door groaned, slowly swinging open on its own. Outside the sky had changed. It wasn't night anymore, but it wasn't day either. The stars had rearranged. New constellations glowing softly, unfamiliar and wrong. In the distance, beyond the hills, a faint column of light pulsed upward, steady and slow like a signal. Hayes was the first to speak. It's telling us where to go. Myra nodded, but she was crying. Not from fear. Something else. Grief maybe. Or understanding. No one moved for a long time. They knew they couldn't stay, not after this. Not after the door opened itself. Sam stood. For the first time in days she looked straight at them. Her voice was hoarse but clear. We have to finish it. Darren opened his mouth to argue, but the words died in his throat. Deep down he felt it too. They geared up slowly. Every motion felt heavier than it should. The backpacks, the suits, the sensors. Useless probably. But it was something to hold on to. Something human. As they stepped into the cold outside air, the wind stopped. Completely. No sound. No movement. Even the trees stood still. They followed the light. Not because they wanted to, but because something inside them said they had no choice. Not anymore. Behind them, the outpost door shut itself. No sound. Just finality. The walk to the signal took hours, maybe longer. Time didn't work right out here. The ground felt soft beneath their boots, like it was breathing. The sky changed color every few minutes, blue then red then something like green but not quite. They reached the ridge just before whatever passed for dawn here. And there it was. A structure, half buried, massive and ancient. It pulsed with the same rhythm as the signal. A slow, heavy beat like a heart. Hayes stepped forward. This is what it wanted us to find. But even he didn't know if he meant the planet, or something else. Myra collapsed to her knees. It's awake now, she whispered. No one asked what she meant. From inside the structure, light spilled upward, soft and white, but somehow cold. It made their skin crawl like it was looking through them, measuring them. And then, the ground trembled. Not from movement. From sound. A deep vibration, low and ancient, rising from the earth itself. The team fell silent. They didn't breathe. The light pulsed again. And then the voice came, not in sound but inside them. It wasn't human. But it knew what humans were. And it wanted something. Something they hadn't yet realized they'd brought with them. The air thickened. The wind started to return, this time with whispers they couldn't translate. The structure began to shift. And the real reason they were here, why the company had sent them, why the signal started, was about to be revealed. But they were already too far in. And turning back was no longer an option. The vibrations deepened, like the heartbeat of the planet itself, sending a tremor through the ground. Hayes reached for his communicator, but the screen flickered, static flashing in waves. His pulse quickened. The air felt dense now, thick with something he couldn't place. A pressure that made his chest feel tight, almost suffocating. His eyes darted to Myra, who was still kneeling, her face pale and shaking, as if she could sense something they all missed. What's happening? Darren asked, his voice low, barely above a whisper. Myra didn't answer immediately. Her gaze was fixed on the towering structure in front of them, but her thoughts seemed miles away. It was clear that whatever had awoken had reached deeper into her than anyone else. Her eyes were wide, her lips trembling as she slowly stood, her breath coming in ragged gasps. It's not a message, she said, her voice hoarse and distant. It's a call. A summons. The others looked at her, confusion and fear evident in their faces. They hadn't even considered the possibility that this was more than a signal, more than a beacon. They had thought it was just an alien message, something from a distant civilization, a first step toward understanding. But now, with the ground shaking and the light pulsing ominously, it felt as if they had walked straight into a trap. I thought we were here to communicate, to learn, Hayes muttered, his gaze shifting from Myra to the others. But now, a sudden sharp crack echoed through the air, a sound like the breaking of metal. The team froze. From the depths of the structure, a dark shadow moved, a silhouette forming within the glowing light. It wasn't human. It wasn't even close. A figure rose from the darkened interior, its shape massive and angular, stretching toward the sky like a dark monument. It wasn't a creature of flesh but something darker, harder to comprehend. Its form shimmered like a fluid of shadows, with jagged edges that seemed to ripple and pulse with energy. It was enormous, dwarfing even the tallest structures of the outpost. The light it emanated was cold, sickening, like it drew the warmth from the air itself. Get back! Hayes shouted, his voice thick with panic. He grabbed Myra's arm, yanking her to her feet, but she barely reacted. Her gaze remained fixed on the figure, and her eyes filled with something that terrified him. It wasn't fear, it was recognition. No, she whispered, barely audible. It knows me. Before Hayes could react, the ground trembled once again, this time more violently, sending them all stumbling. A wave of cold, unnatural air rushed out from the structure, pushing against them as if trying to force them back. The shadowy figure, if it could even be called that, moved toward them, stretching outward like the fingers of some vast alien entity, reaching for them, pulling them into its fold. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The light from the structure flickered, dimming as if the creature was reconsidering its next move. A deep rumble sounded from the sky, and the stars overhead shifted again, realigning in a pattern that no one could understand. We shouldn't have come here, Darren muttered, eyes wide in disbelief. His hand gripped his weapon, but it felt useless now. The creature, or whatever it was, had moved too quickly, too effortlessly. It was like they were nothing more than ants under a magnifying glass. We don't have a choice anymore, Hayes said, his voice low and tight with uncertainty. We need answers, and I think we're about to get them. But Myra wasn't listening. Her eyes had glazed over, and her lips were moving in a low, almost inaudible chant. It wasn't anything they recognized. Not a language. Not even a sound that felt human. It was a hum, a resonance that seemed to vibrate through her entire body. What's happening to her? Sam's voice broke through the tension. She had been eerily silent up until now, her hands trembling as she clutched her rifle. Before Hayes could answer, the air shifted again and the temperature dropped. The light from the structure flickered once more, but this time, it turned red, fiery like the eyes of a predator. It was a warning. Or a challenge. They didn't know which, but it didn't matter. The air was thick with anticipation now, like something was building up to a breaking point. Then, as if on cue, the ground erupted. A massive explosion tore through the base of the structure, sending a shockwave that threw them all to the ground. The earth cracked open beneath their feet, and the sound was deafening, a roar like thunder followed by a deafening silence. Rook barely managed to regain his footing, his body sore and disoriented from the blast. The others were already scrambling to get up, their eyes wide with shock and fear. But when they looked toward the structure, the figure was gone. For a moment, it seemed like the nightmare had ended. The sky was still. The air was calm. The ground was no longer trembling. But then came the second shock. A pulse of energy shot out from the center of the structure, illuminating the entire valley in an eerie, unnatural light. The blast was too sudden, too powerful. It sent a wave of force so strong that it felt like the ground itself was buckling under the weight of it. The force knocked them all to the ground again, their bodies slammed against the dirt, their ears ringing from the impact. Hayes's vision blurred, his mind struggling to stay focused. But through the haze he saw something. Something that sent chills down his spine. A fleet of ships, massive, sleek and dark, emerged from the clouds. Their forms were like nothing they had ever seen before, their surfaces smooth and angular, reflecting the red light of the structure. They were impossibly large, and they moved with an unnatural precision, almost as if they were being controlled by something that wasn't bound by the same laws of physics that governed everything else. No, Hayes breathed, his voice catching in his throat. No, this can't be happening. The ships circled overhead, slowly at first, but then they began to move with increasing speed. It was clear now, they weren't just passing through. They were surrounding them. The team. The outpost. The planet itself. And in the distance, beneath the towering structure, a figure emerged. Not the same shadow they had seen before. Something different. A presence. It was calling to them. For a split second, everything seemed to stop. Time stretched, the silence deafening before the voice came again, not in words but in the very air itself. It was more than a message now. It was a command. And Hayes knew, no matter what they had thought before, no matter what they had hoped, that they were no longer just witnesses. They were players in a game far older, far more dangerous than anything they had ever imagined. The stakes had just been raised, and they had no idea how much worse it could get. The ships above them began to descend, each one moving with a slow, deliberate grace. The sky turned darker as the shadows from the ships stretched across the valley. Hayes's heart hammered in his chest as he looked around at the others. They were all wide-eyed, frozen in place, their weapons trembling in their hands, barely able to comprehend the sight unfolding above them. Then, without warning, a voice rang out, clear and piercing, resonating through the air as if it came from every direction at once. It wasn't in a language they knew. It wasn't even a language at all. It was an overwhelming presence, a vibration that they felt deep in their bones. Asterisk, you are here to witness. You are here to understand. Asterisk. Hayes's breath caught in his throat. He could feel the words, not just hear them. They dug into his mind like sharp claws, forcing him to confront something he hadn't been ready for. He wasn't just witnessing this. He wasn't just an observer. He was a part of it. The ground trembled again, but this time it was different. It wasn't the chaotic quaking they had felt before. This time, the earth seemed to hum, vibrating in tune with the voice, like a massive machine warming up, preparing for something irreversible. Myra stood taller now, her body rigid as if she were no longer fully herself. Her eyes had turned a deep, glowing shade of violet, and her lips parted as she spoke, her voice no longer her own. It was a sound that resonated within every person's chest, a sound that carried with it a force beyond their understanding. I've seen this before, she said, her voice distant, almost mechanical. I've heard the call, the ancient call. The words chilled Hayes to his core. She wasn't just speaking. She was channeling something ancient, something that had been dormant for millennia. The creature that had risen from the structure had been waiting for her to remember. No, Hayes whispered, a cold sweat forming on his forehead. No, this can't be. But Myra wasn't listening anymore. She raised her hands toward the ships above, as if in communion with them, her fingers curling as if reaching for something far beyond the sky. And then it happened. The ground ruptured beneath them, sending a shockwave through the air, a blast so powerful that it knocked them all off their feet. Hayes struggled to keep his balance, his vision blurred, but when he looked up, he saw it. The shadow that had loomed over them, the one they had all feared, was not just a physical entity. It was more than a ship. It was an ancient being, a creature that stretched through dimensions, its form writhing in the space between stars. Its vast presence seemed to fill the entire valley, its mind reaching out and consuming everything in its path. And Myra was standing at its center, as though she had always belonged there. Hayes's heart sank. The fear that had gripped him now turned to disbelief. She was no longer the person he had known. She was something else, something unrecognizable. "No, Myra," he shouted, crawling toward her, his voice breaking with desperation. "Please come back." But she didn't respond. Her eyes, glowing brighter now, locked onto him, and for the first time, he saw something in them that wasn't the woman he had known. It was something ancient, something alien. "The end of humanity is not here," she whispered, her voice now a harmonious hum that resonated within his very soul. "It is the beginning." A crackling energy surged through the air, and the figure above them grew even larger, becoming a swirling vortex of light and shadow. It began to pull at everything, bending the air, twisting reality itself. The ships above, those massive, menacing vessels, were no longer simply ships. They were conduits, channels for something much larger. They were the harbingers of something much darker. The team looked on in helpless horror. Darren tried to raise his rifle, but it seemed useless. The energy surrounding them bent his vision, distorted the very fabric of their reality. Every instinct told him to run, but his legs wouldn't move. "She's gone," Sam whispered, her voice shaking. "She's gone." Hayes couldn't tear his eyes away from Myra. She had transformed into something beyond human, something far beyond anything he could comprehend. It wasn't just power she had gained. It was understanding, knowledge. She was connected to the being above them, to the ancient force that had been waiting for eons. But then, something unexpected happened. A pulse of light shot from Myra's chest, bright and blinding. It wasn't coming from her eyes, nor from the ships above. It was from deep within her, a light that burned with the intensity of 1,000 suns. The ground beneath them cracked wide open, and the very air around them seemed to implode. Hayes fell to the ground, his ears ringing from the force. But then, as suddenly as it had come, it stopped. The light dimmed. The tremor ceased. The ships above halted, hovering in place like frozen giants, their weapons no longer trained on them. Why did it stop?" Hayes whispered, his voice hoarse. The silence that followed felt deafening. For a long moment nothing moved. And then Myra spoke again, but this time her voice was her own. "I was never meant to control it," she said, her voice soft and trembling. "I was meant to stop it." The revelation hit Hayes like a punch to the stomach. Myra had never been a part of their enemy. She had been their salvation all along. The strange connection, the pull she had felt toward the ancient force, it wasn't about control. It was about resisting it, about standing between humanity and something far worse. "You stopped it?" Darren's voice cracked. "But how?" She smiled weakly, her strength waning, and for a moment Hayes saw the woman he had known again. The woman he had fought beside. "I didn't control it," she whispered, her words carrying a deep, sorrowful weight. I reminded it that it had forgotten something." She paused, taking a labored breath. "Humanity." It had forgotten humanity. The silence that followed was heavy. For a moment, everything felt suspended in time. The ancient being, the ships, Myra, all of it hung in the balance as if the world was holding its breath. And then, just as they thought it was over, the sky above them rippled once again. The ships above started to fade, not into the distance but into nothingness, as if they had never been there at all. But it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. A voice echoed in the distance, this time not from the ships or the creature, but from the very ground itself. It was the same voice they had heard before, but now it was different. "You have forgotten. You are no longer needed." And then the ground beneath them began to shake once more. The real war had just begun. The tremors beneath them intensified, shaking the ground with such force that it felt like the very planet was about to tear itself apart. Hayes could barely keep his feet as the world tilted beneath him. He reached out, grabbing onto a rock, his breath ragged, eyes wide with confusion and fear. "We need to move," Darren shouted, his voice barely audible over the roar of the shaking earth. But Hayes couldn't move. He couldn't tear his gaze from Myra, who was standing in the center of it all, her eyes glowing once more with that strange violet hue. The energy swirling around them had taken on a life of its own. It rippled through the atmosphere, warping reality like a storm cloud bending light. Hayes could feel it. This energy wasn't just a physical force. It was a living thing, a presence that moved and breathed alongside them. It wanted something, but Hayes couldn't yet understand what. Suddenly Myra's body buckled and she dropped to her knees. The power she had tapped into was too much for her. Hayes staggered forward, his legs barely carrying him, and reached out to her, his heart pounding in his chest. "Myra, no," he breathed, panic overtaking him. "Stay with me. Please." But Myra's eyes, filled with an impossible sorrow, met his. The light in her gaze was fading now, flickering like a dying star. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice so soft, so fragile. "I couldn't stop it, not completely. I've been trying to protect you, but there's no escaping what's coming. It's too late." Hayes's chest tightened, his mind racing. He couldn't lose her. Not now, not after everything they had been through. "No, you can do this," he said, gripping her shoulders, desperate. "You're the one who stopped it before. You can stop it again. We—" "No," Myra interrupted, her voice firmer now, though still tinged with grief. "You've seen what it is. You've seen what's inside me now. This force, this entity. It's older than anything we know. It's not something we can fight. It's not something we can understand. But we can," she paused, wincing in pain. "We can stop it from consuming everything. That's what I've been trying to do. To sever the connection." Hayes felt a cold shiver creep down his spine. Sever the connection? What connection? He had no time to ask the question. A loud, thunderous crack split the sky. Something was coming. Something far worse than they could have imagined. Out of the swirling storm above, a massive shape descended. Hayes squinted against the violent wind, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. It was not a ship. It was far too large, far too ancient. It was a living thing, its form shifting, growing, as though it existed in multiple dimensions at once. The creature's surface was made of countless dark, undulating shapes that seemed to pulse with life, each one pressing against the other, as though the creature was constantly consuming and renewing itself. A deep, unsettling hum reverberated through the ground as the creature lowered itself closer to the valley. The air around them grew thick, almost suffocating. Every instinct in Hayes told him to run, but his legs refused to move. "Myra, you have to do something." Hayes shouted again, but Myra's response came not in words, but through her actions. She lifted her hands to the sky, trembling as though reaching for something just out of reach. "I can't hold it back any longer," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry, Hayes. I thought I could save us. But this thing, it has its own plans. It's been waiting for us. Waiting for me. No. You're not alone in this." Hayes cried, grabbing her arm. "We're in this together." But Myra shook her head. "No, you don't understand. It's not just about us. It's about everything, the whole universe. What it wants, what it needs, it's bigger than both of us." Her voice faltered, and for the first time she looked truly afraid. "And I'm the one who brought it here." Hayes's heart pounded in his chest. His mind reeled. What was she saying? What did she mean? "Myra, don't do this. Please." But her eyes were distant, her connection to him slipping further away with each passing second. "Myra, please?" Hayes shouted again, desperation seeping into his voice. But the words didn't seem to reach her. Instead, she closed her eyes, her hands falling to her sides, as though resigning herself to whatever fate awaited her. Suddenly, the ground beneath them shook harder, sending another shockwave through the valley. The massive creature above them, the ancient entity, began to descend faster, its vast body like an unstoppable force of nature. It was almost upon them, and Hayes had no idea how they could escape. Then, as if answering his thoughts, a deep, earth-shaking roar filled the air. The creature hesitated, its body twisting in agony before pulling back. Hayes's eyes widened as he realized what was happening. Something or someone was fighting back. He turned just in time to see a small group of figures emerge from the depths of the valley, their faces obscured by masks and armor. They were human, but there was something different about them. Something otherworldly in the way they moved, in the way they spoke without words, as if their very presence disrupted the flow of reality. They surrounded Myra, their hands raised in unison, casting strange, shimmering energy around her. Myra's body tensed, the violet light flickering once more as she absorbed the power they were channeling into her. Hayes's heart raced. "Who are they?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. One of the figures, tall, cloaked in flowing black, stepped forward. The voice that came from them was calm but filled with an undeniable force. "We are the keepers of balance. We have watched for eons. We have seen the paths you have walked, the decisions you have made." The figure's gaze fell on Hayes. "And now you must walk the path that was set for you. All of you. Together." Hayes stared, confused. "What does that mean? What do you want from us?" The figure didn't answer immediately. Instead, they turned toward Myra, whose body was now crackling with energy, a storm building inside her. The light that had flickered in her eyes was no longer just a symbol of her connection to the creature. It was a beacon. And the keepers of balance were guiding her. The figure spoke again, this time with an intensity that shook the very ground beneath them. "This battle is not yours alone, nor is it theirs. The creature above us, it is not merely a weapon. It is the embodiment of a forgotten time, a time before all life as you know it. It seeks to reclaim what was lost, to return everything to the way it once was." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog, pressing down on them all. Hayes felt the weight of it in his chest. "And Myra?" he asked, his voice breaking through the silence. "What does she have to do with all this?" "She is the key," the figure said simply. "She was always meant to be. But even the key must choose its own path." Hayes turned to Myra, the realization dawning on him. She wasn't just a pawn in some cosmic game. She was the one who would decide the future of everything. She could stop the creature or she could let it consume everything. The creature above them roared again, louder this time, and Hayes could feel it shaking the very foundation of his being. It was so close now, its tendrils stretching toward them, reaching for Myra. She stood tall, her face streaked with tears, her hands trembling. She glanced one last time at Hayes, her eyes filled with sorrow and resolution. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice filled with finality. "But this is where we end." And with that, Myra's body exploded with light, brighter than anything Hayes had ever seen. It engulfed the creature, wrapping itself around it like a cage of energy, forcing it back. The sky split open as the very fabric of reality seemed to tear, and for a moment, it felt like everything, the universe itself, was on the brink of collapse. But then, just as quickly as it had started, it was over. The creature vanished. The storm calmed. The valley returned to stillness. Hayes collapsed to his knees, breathing heavily, his heart racing, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. The valley was silent now, save for the distant sound of wind. He looked around. The keepers had vanished. The strange figures were gone, leaving only the fading echo of their words in the air. And Myra? She was gone too. But her sacrifice had been the final act, the one that had saved them all. The battle was over. The creature was gone. And humanity, though forever changed, had survived. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Hayes allowed himself to breathe. The war was over and somehow they had won. The valley remained silent, a haunting stillness settling over everything. Hayes sat on the cold ground, his breath coming in ragged gasps, still reeling from the events that had unfolded in such rapid succession. The storm that had once consumed the sky had dissipated, leaving only a faint breeze in its wake. The distant hum of the battlefield, the cries of creatures and ships locked in a deadly struggle, had faded into the abyss. But as Hayes looked up, staring into the distance, something gnawed at him. He hadn't been able to say goodbye. He hadn't been able to tell Myra that he loved her, that her sacrifice would never be forgotten. That despite the impossible odds they had still found each other, if only for a brief moment in time. Now she was gone. Vanished. Her final act had left an indelible mark on the universe, one that would never fade, even if the memory of her face was lost to time. Hayes felt a deep ache in his chest, a void where once there had been warmth, hope, and a future he dared to dream of. But he couldn't dwell on that now. There was work to do. The others were still there, scattered across the valley, struggling to come to terms with the aftermath. Darren, his right-hand man through so much, was standing a few paces away, his eyes lost in the haze of the recent chaos. His face was streaked with dirt and blood, but it was his eyes that told the real story. There was a sadness in them, a lingering grief that mirrored Hayes's own. The others, the survivors from their ship, stood huddled in groups, whispering among themselves. Some were injured, others in shock. But all of them shared the same heavy burden, the knowledge that everything they had fought for had come at a terrible cost. Hayes stood slowly, wiping the dirt from his hands, and then he walked toward them, his steps uncertain but steady. He had been their leader, their commander, and now, in the wake of this victory, it was his responsibility to guide them forward. "I know this is hard," Hayes said, his voice hoarse as he spoke to the small group that had gathered around him. But we can't just stop here. We've come so far. Myra, she gave everything for us. For humanity. We owe it to her, to all of us, to keep moving forward. Darren looked up, his gaze heavy with pain but also determination. What now? He asked quietly. What happens next? The war's over, but we're not exactly in a safe place. Hayes nodded slowly. You're right. The war is over, but we don't know what's left. We've seen the worst of what the universe can throw at us. We've survived it. We've made it through. But we can't stop now. We need to rebuild, to understand what happened, and how to make sure this never happens again. There was silence, the weight of those words settling on everyone like a heavy cloak. Hayes knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The universe was vast, and though they had won this battle, they had seen only the tip of the iceberg in the war that was brewing just beneath the surface. There were forces out there beyond their understanding, and they couldn't afford to underestimate them. We need to get back to the ship, Hayes said finally, breaking the silence. We'll regroup, assess the situation, and figure out our next move. For now we survive. But we do it together. Darren met his eyes, the resolve in his gaze clear. Together, he repeated. One by one, the others nodded, some still too stunned to speak, but all of them united in the same purpose. There was nothing more to say. The journey wasn't over, not by a long shot. Hayes led the way back toward the remnants of their ship, each step carrying the weight of everything that had come before. The world they knew had been forever altered. Their species had narrowly avoided extinction, and yet, in this fragile moment, they stood at the precipice of something new. As they neared the ship, Hayes glanced back one last time toward the valley. The place where everything had changed. Where everything had almost ended. But now, it was a place of new beginnings, a reminder of what humanity was capable of. A reminder that, even in the face of extinction, they would fight. They would survive. They would rise. The ship loomed ahead, a silent monolith against the dark sky. As Hayes reached the door, he paused, turning to face his crew once more. We fight for a future, he said quietly, though his voice carried across the still night air. And we do it for those who can't fight anymore. For Myra. For the fallen. And for the future generations who will never know the darkness we've seen. The door to the ship opened with a soft hiss, and Hayes stepped inside, his crew following close behind. The ship was dark inside, the flickering lights casting shadows across the walls. But in those shadows there was hope. And the promise of a new dawn. As the ship lifted off, leaving the shattered remains of the valley below, Hayes felt the familiar hum of the engines beneath his feet. The crew was silent, each of them lost in their own thoughts, but Hayes could feel the weight of their eyes on him. They had been through so much together, and now there was no going back. The stars stretched out before them, an endless sea of possibilities, each one a reminder of what they had fought for. The universe was vast, and though the creature that had nearly consumed them was gone, there were still countless threats lurking in the dark corners of space. But for the first time in a long while, Hayes felt a glimmer of hope. The road ahead would be hard. There would be more battles, more challenges, more sacrifices. But humanity had faced extinction, and had emerged victorious. And in that victory there was power. The power of survival. The power of unity. The power of defiance. As the ship soared through the void, Hayes allowed himself one last thought, one final bittersweet reflection. We made it, he whispered to himself, his eyes gazing out into the endless expanse of space. Against all odds we made it. And in that moment the stars ahead seemed to shine a little brighter. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it was theirs to shape.